let's get this evening started. Thank you.
Jill will be here, by the way.
Okay,
Running late,
Jill will be here.
and so we're Apollo.
Okay. Ron?
Good afternoon, everyone. We have Dr. Desmore and Angela Nader are not going to be able, I don't know if anybody on our team has time constraints. Good.
No? Okay, great, perfect.
Certainly the summer fans.
No, not anymore. Thank you very much, Ron.
Having the Giants, that's only one I like.
And, yeah, Iris.
The Knicks won, so we're missing Shea and Lewis. Mario is running a little late, stuck in traffic. Iris had a emergency on campus that she had to deal with, so she was running late as well. And very excited that Jill Castellano is on the way.
Okay, great.
We did make accommodations if she was bringing a guest. Well, I shouldn't say yes, but a child. Yes.
Thank you very much.
What's happening?
Oh, Mario's
Okay,
here.
Mario is here. Yeah, just walk in the door. Mario, you down here. All right, minutes from our last meeting. Anybody had any issues with them or corrections, deletions, additions, clarifications? Okay. That's it. May I see thumbs, please, to accept the minutes as written. Great, thank you. All right, I know there are several things on the agenda this evening, so where do we want to start? I know we have a couple of committee recommendations, we have some cleanup stuff. So would we like to go first?
We can start in order.
Good.
It sounds
Just
fine.
a suggestion.
Sure.
All right, we kind of got the Article 10 proposal towards the end of our last meeting anyway, so that might be a good place to start if we can wrap that up.
Yep.
I'm telling you to pass them down.
Sorry. I'm holding up proceedings here.
We can start.
All right, so go ahead, Ron.
Great.
Now that we have the cookie situation.
Finally, I appreciate your patience, finally got some conversations with budget and so our post-secondary career and technical centers. We're proposing, I'd like to, I guess, present this as an option for us to take a look at in relation to the K post-secondary bonuses. And so I think there was a discussion between budget and the directors to basically say we'll just align what we're providing for those bonuses based on industry certifications, just like we do in the CAPE certification. So if that changes any way, shape, or form, then it would be aligned to that. And I think that's about the only difference from what we talked about previously. So if you guys want to take a look at that.
Kevin?
So, pleading ignorance, what is currently the bonus paid for secondary weight 1, 2, and 3?
Alright, that would be Article 10.
Oh, it's in the contract. Imagine that. Well, look it up. I'll be all right.
I'll go ahead and look it up. Oops, that's 8. Yes, so the weight of 0, or weight of 0.1 is $25. 0.2 is 50, 0.3 is 75, 0.5 or 1 is 100. I think I guess we only went to tier 3, which is the same as .3.
It says 0.2 on here, number 3. Does it say 0.3?
I think so, but, because that would be what we have in here.
We also have, I'm glad you brought the contract, that's where I wanted to point to. The tier 3 I believe should be a weight of 0.3. And we also have weight of 0.5 or 1.0s as well. So we should probably lift that paragraph into this section as well.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why that wasn't included in there, but I think the idea was to align it specifically with what it says here but there was a caveat, I think, in the, again, this was a conversation between the career tech director and budget. I think there's one sentence in there too that says that there's a cap of $5,000.
Kevin?
I think the $5,000 for them was in the original proposal
Yeah,
from them.
I think it was too, yes, I agree.
And I think that related more to, we asked them to work within their budget.
Right.
And so I think maybe that's what they figured they could have afforded in a best case scenario, which is probably what happens every year where all the kids pass and
Right.
we're producing these,
Yeah.
these skill level employees for the county.
Clarify some of the notes then, am I copying the weight of 0.5 or 1 into this proposal?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now on 0.3.
Yes.
Again, pleading ignorance. The weight things are directly related to what the certification is, right?
Yes, it is. And I think the example, and probably Brian can do a much better job explaining that, but I'll just take a shot at it from my career tech background. So, a welding certificate, because of the machinery and all of the things that are involved in that, as opposed to maybe a software like Microsoft certification, might have a different weight because of the expense and all the things that are required for that. Did I hit that right, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. For the most part.
Another question, Kevin, or clarification?
Just, this has the blessing of their administrators, right? Like their original plan did.
Say that again?
This has their blessing, right?
Yes.
Any other questions or clarifications needed?
This week out of the 10 compensation.
Sure.
Sure, why not? Anything else on this? Kurt?
No, I'll withdraw.
Okay.
All right, never mind.
All right,
Can we test this option?
sure, absolutely. All right, had a request to test the option that was just presented, which was option 10, I believe.
Yeah, it's great.
Right, and this is self-funded from the technical colleges. Kevin?
There'll be notification if the funding dries up prior to the beginning of the school year, right?
Correct.
We have it like that, like they know
They know.
going into next school year, they're getting this,
They're getting
and
it.
they'll know, and it'll be easily definable that they're not getting it. I think I'm all for this.
Right.
And this is long overdue, and I've always said that what they do with their budget, if they can come up with a plan, who am I to say whatever? I just want to make sure if we get in a situation where because of the political climate, they pull this funding,
Right.
that there's a way for the employees go, well, how come you didn't get it? We can say this is why we didn't get it.
Yes, and that was part of the discussion that hadn't taken place, was this is the budget. This is coming out, so we can't come back and say we need to replace that part of the budget, with some additional money that goes in it. I think that was the conversation took place and was agreed upon.
Okay. Go ahead, Kurt.
I'm not trying to get in the weeds or spoil this one. I noticed on the CAPE industry certification funding list, there's a host of them that have a weight of .025. Would we round that one up to 0.3, or would we leave them at 0.2?
This one, I'm gonna look at the career tech person to see if that's ever come up before, or do we need to add that? Because I'm assuming it currently exists, so whatever, I would say whatever way we currently do it, that would
Looking
be.
at digital. Are you looking at digital tool certifications or industry certifications? Because digital tools usually come in at 0.25, and that's for middle schoolers, elementary.
Honestly, I can't really, I mean, they look like they're computing essentials, cybersecurity essentials, spreadsheet essentials.
Yeah, those are the digital tool certifications. It's a different thing.
Okay.
It's what our middle schoolers go for, so.
Okay, perfect.
Great, thank you, Brian.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. We ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. May I see thumbs on option 10 for Lee Technical College certification? All right. Wow, and everybody did, no sideways or anything. Hey.
This is option 10.
Option 10 for Article 10. All right. Excellent. So on the agenda, what was next? Work experience proposal?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of defer, I know this was part of the conversation at labor management, which I was not present at. So I don't know if we can talk about the credible teaching experience would be granted if it's verifiable, was earned while the employee held a valid teaching certificate. Experience may be from a public, charter, or private educational institution providing a certification. So I believe the key is public, private educational institution, which we currently, by practice, did not do. Now, I did have a concern over policy, because it doesn't specifically state that in policy when it talks in the policy about credible years of experience. Two things have come up since I've been here. Number one is, why don't we give credit for people who have taught in private institutions? So if you taught at Bishop Moreau and wanted to come over, that we typically don't grant credit for that. And then the other piece was, if you come from out of country, it specifically states out of state and how we handle that. But we have had people who have gotten their teaching degree in France, for example, and taught, at a really, a high-level institution, public institution in France, and we weren't able to give credit because we don't necessarily allow that. But one of the issues that we have is it's sometimes hard to verify that the certificate requirements are the same that we require. It could be completely different, and therefore that would be one of the reasons why we don't. So as long as we can verify that whatever certificate that person held, we can go through some formal process to determine the credibility even of the certificate they used while they were teaching, to make sure that we could offer that.
Kevin?
I think my recollection of the reason we didn't do private was related to evaluations as well. Since 2008, you can't reward somebody for needs improvement or unsatisfactory. So part of the district's position, as I remember it, was, how do we know the evaluation that employee got at, I'm not going to pick up Bishop Moreau, but they're the one I can think of. How did we know the evaluation that employee got at Bishop Moreau was as vigorous as ours, and how do we correlate that with our system? So that I know was a big hang up in the past, and I see Mr. Doty nod his head, because he was kind of in it as well. And then the next thing I think I have concerns about is we have very strict rules around when an employee can bring in experience. And if I taught for a private school for years and then came here, and I knew you weren't going to give me the experience, and I've been teaching here 10 years, and now you're going to allow people to do it, do I have a recourse to go back and get mine, and do I have Because, and then, you know, I think we need to give everybody the opportunity. Like I mentioned in labor management, I was a regional trainer and vice president of operations for Blockbuster Video and Circuit City. And I use those two examples because they no longer exist and there's no way you can verify it. But, so again, I think a couple of things is, are we gonna allow everybody who's currently working for the district to have a time limit to go back and get that stuff? What are the years worth? Like if I'm bringing in 5 years, does that all of a sudden put me with more money in my pocket than somebody who's taught for the district for the same amount of time with my 2 things combined? And then what are we gonna do with special instructional? Because when we move them $3,000 or $4,000 more than the instructional staff, we essentially told them your experience no longer matters. And I think, you know, I think that's something else to be considered. I mean, I know TALC is in some weird thing where they're being asked to provide resumes to possibly do this with TALC. You know, again, my main problems are, does everybody have an opportunity to resubmit? And what does that look like? What is a year worth so we make sure somebody who brings in 5 and moves to 15 as opposed to 10 isn't making more than somebody who's currently at 15? And then what are we gonna do with special instructional? Because, yeah, they make more, but they don't make that much more. You know what I mean? They make 4, maybe 5 grand more in general, and that's not a lot of money. And so with them, it's even more complicated because do I have to have been engaged in my craft with an educational institution? So if I were a psychologist and worked for, what's the name of that place by my house? The Salis Care, let's say, is that going to be counted the same as if I worked as a psychologist for a private school system somewhere else? And so those are the things I think with the special instructional group that really need to be hammered out before we agree to anything, because, you know, there's always, and Mr. Burnside often talks about unintended consequences, right? This idea and this changing so radically what we do will have a million unintended consequences. And even though we can't foresee them all, we can foresee a lot of them if we put a room together. And, you know, before we say we're gonna do it. So those are my concerns.
All right, Anna?
I have the same concerns.
I'm
raised
short and
my hand
sweet.
before you started
Good. Like it. Anything else? Kevin?
What Anna said.
All right, so Kurt?
Just the only other thing that we discussed in labor management that hasn't been said is we were pointed to the starting salary calculator on the school district website, and I just kind of played around with it. I would like to know what formula that is being used behind the scenes, because different combinations of years that I'm putting into your calculator, I get very similar or exact same salary. So, you know, years ago, we had a placement schedule, and every year was worth about $500, and that was just a placement schedule. It looks like here, it's, I guess there's a range, so I'm really curious what that would look like if somebody brought in, say 3 years. I think that's all I have right now.
Okay.
Is that a data request, Dr. Pizzone? Is that?
Sure.
Okay. Because I don't have the answer to that. That was part of the discussion, I think, last time around was, you know, we don't really have anything that's concrete that we can take a look at to say, you know, you're bringing in this many years of service, this is where you point to, so.
And just to give you an example, I mean, I just pulled it up here. Base salary, 0 years, $50,500, what I expect. 2 years, Florida public years of instructional experience gets me $51,400. That's the same for 1 year of public experience and 3 years. Oh, and 4 years.
So 0 to 5 is.
0 to 4 is one set amount. And then it looks like at 5 years, it jumps to $52,850. So it doesn't seem to have that graduated step as.
It used to be the individual years and the $500 increment per year until that year that the state significantly raised the base salaries, was that 2020? That went away and then it went to just everybody went to 20, all the same base pay with that year. And then a year or two after that, they came back out and it's like the 0 to 4, 5 to 10, so in the groupings.
Sure.
Am I understanding it correctly that the district believes that the starting salary schedule is not negotiable? That the district can set what those starting amounts are? Or am I misunderstanding? When we went from, oh God, whatever it was, to 47.3, we effectively collapsed 13 years. That's not what I'm seeing here, though.
I don't have the, and Dr. Desamore probably would be better suited to answer that, so again, that would be a data request that we'd have to bring back.
Okay. All right, anything else on work experience? Evan?
I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I just think, it's gotta hash out. And so, again, I think with me, the equity issue of everybody having the opportunity to go back, because my worst case scenario would be, I did do something at a private school, and for whatever reason, that private school is out of Blockbuster Video or Circuit City, and no longer exists, and there's no verification. And sometimes people have a difficult time getting verification, and so I think we really need to be intentional about how we're gonna do this, and so.
And I think typically, when these kinds of things come into play, like, you have to be able to verify it. If you can't verify it, then you can't get the user service. So that would have to be included in the language to say verifiable, credible years. And that's what we did with the.
But I would see the argument from an employee being, hey, listen, if you'd have let me verify it 5 years ago, I would have been able to verify it.
Right.
Now you've decided to do it today and the school no longer exists. I'm being disenfranchised. And there's no way, there may be no way to solve that problem.
Right.
But that's, like Rumsfeld used to say, there's known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, unknown unknowns. So that's why I think we should, really sit down and beat this to death, because this has the potential to drastically shift people's salaries.
Okay, and it has to bring it up.
And are you saying what he said again?
Did I steal it?
I'll give you the opportunity to at least say that anyway.
Guess you're gonna have to find out, aren't you? No, I was trying to think, so if there was like a window that was open, my first question is, how many years are employees currently allowed to bring in? And then if there was an opportunity, like,
20, yeah. Yes.
if we opened it up, like, if it was just charter, just private, I just hear a lot of stuff from employees that come from out of state that say, oh, they only took 5 of my years. And I don't necessarily know the reasons behind that. I just know that's just conversations I hear frequently. So if we were going to open up, a window or time, hopefully everyone that this apply to would have a chance to resubmit, resubmit stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Point taken.
Anything else on work experience other than we need a lot more discussion and maybe need to wait on this issue? Okay. Next on the agenda was career ladder committee recommendation. Anna, you're doing that?
Yes, but Jill just got here and I told her I'd open the door for her.
I think
I'll go.
Okay.
I'll go do it. I already know this. Thank you.
Okay, so, the career ladder committee met a few times this year, and we talked about a lot of the different things that apply to career ladder. We got feedback from stakeholders. We looked at teacher retention trends, and we kind of looked at where things were potentially holding people back from moving forward with the career ladder. We talked about at the apprentice level that we wanted to hide the career level basics course in PeopleSoft, and we wanted to add a updated version into the Apple's coursework, just to ensure continuity and align with modern content delivery. We just felt that could be redundant, and employees could potentially get confused in the system. So currently with the career level, credible years of service were at year 10 that you could move from, that you would move up. And so we want to decrease the required level of service from 10 to 7. Our rationale is that the retention data indicated a significant percentage of teachers were exiting the profession by year 7. So this would allow people to accelerate through the career level and hopefully retain some of those teachers that we were losing. The professional learning alignment, we wanted to really integrate those professional learning plans at the school site, make sure that the SIRS platform is being used to track the in-school training that are already being done. It's a career ladder priorities. We want to provide clear guidance for SIRS to make sure that they know how professional learning can be credited toward the required reading and ESE points. Let's see. We wanted to give them the SIRS as well, because they're the ones that implement those trainings and those codes at the school site. Make sure that they really we want to provide training for them and support for them. We want to offer more regularly scheduled in-person training for ESE and reading and service points. We want to reduce the reliance on fiddlers offering improved accessibility for educators in our areas. This is my favorite. We want to remove the buckets. We found that when we were really looking at, there wasn't a lot of, I believe, like bucket 3. There were a couple buckets that people were really having a hard time getting the points for it, and our employees were essentially taking courses that had nothing to do with their job just to get buckets in the point, or points in the bucket. So instead, we want to do a 200 total in-service points over 4 years. And then we will also ensure that the mandatory learning is excluded from the career ladder points. And I think this would make things a lot more fluid at the school site level. Many of us are doing trainings. We are doing trainings at our school sites, making sure that the SIRS are registering them, so that way the ease of getting those 200 total points is a lot more easier for our employees. We want to, for participation, we want to maintain current participation metrics and continue counting from the apprentice level forward. That is something that's already in place. Your participation does start at the apprentice level. And then we have some implementation needs. That we need to work on. So the biggest takeaway here, we want to provide more training for our SIRS to ensure that they are registering the current professional learning at school sites. We want to take away the buckets and do a 200 total in-service hour requirement or professional learning, and then take that years from 10 and drop it down to 7.
All right, anybody have any questions or clarifications they need from the Career Ladder Committee recommendation? Rob?
additional cost related to this reduction from 10 to 7? And was that costed out by the committee?
I'm waiting for the reports, just because we're having issues with people's stuff.
Okay.
So yes, it will be costed out.
All right.
I'll get it costed.
So it will be costed out. It's in the process, but we don't have the figures tonight. Any other questions?
I think technically, we're all in agreement of the recommended changes, and when Dr. Bessemore gets back, we can run that up the budget flagpole and be ready to go ahead and move that forward.
All right, good work, the Real Rabbit Committee. Who else is on it besides Anna and Amy?
Were you on that one or no?
I'm
Pretty sure you were there.
Doesn't mean I'm on it, I would say.
From what I remember, the president's on all the committees.
That's right.
All right, good job, thank you. All right, the next recommendation is coming from,
Turnaround.
you're gonna do this one?
I'm gonna do this one, I'm gonna take a
Okay.
shot at this one. So, we've had some conversations, again, so I just wanna kind of reiterate that the language says about, the turnaround committee and its, goals and objectives for the turnaround committee is really to identify the criteria that we can agree upon to use to then identify schools that would fall into that. And I think the turnaround committee did a great job this year of working collaboratively together. And again, that discussion really was, we need to come up with a criteria, identify the schools, and then fund it according to what the committee identified as the criteria that should be used. And so as a result of that, we did present at the last bargaining session, I think the recommendation for what we considered a possible change in the turnaround committee to targeted school support would be for those 10 schools that were identified as risk level 4, by which the data we used to determine that. And so the conversation was, we have those 10 schools, and regardless of what happens for us moving into next year, that those would be the 10 schools that would have been identified as receiving that additional $4,000 in targeted support for those schools. And then we also discussed that typically the transition schools, those that move out of turnaround, then would be moved into transition, which would actually be Island Coast and East Lee, which under current contract language, all the employees in those two schools would be eligible for a $2,000 supplement under transition. And we also discussed that we currently have, the BSI schools that are listed there. From all indication, we may not have any of those schools, but potentially if they remain as BSI schools, then they would be included in that conversation as being eligible for the $4,000.
All right, is that it?
I'm not sure, again,
Doesn't say hybrid yet.
Because that's our next meeting. That's the ITF session from now on.
So from now on, the turnaround committee, or the targeted school support committee will be held immediately after the ITF.
Totally accurate.
That's it.
I know, I looked at it and thought, was wondering if anything wrong. Okay. Any questions?
On that, Anna, did I miss anything?
Okay, any questions?
I want to say something.
I'll let Anna say something.
Let's answer it first, okay?
We'll follow up and know about it.
So I just wanted to add a little bit of context to kind of where we are, especially since this says that if a settlement is not reached by the end of the contract year. So looking at the district's proposal and the union's proposal, the amounts were higher than what they are right here. But we also, I want to make sure that we recognize that the school year is almost done. 5, 4, and 2 left And, well, 4 and 2. But we also needed to make sure, like, our principals are in a situation where if you're a principal at this school or you're an employee at this school, you are able to do some hiring for that school, that teachers kind of know where they stand. It's a, you know, a substantial amount of money. And so we've done status quo for the past few years. And that was something that we did not want to continue doing, is status quo. So the conversation was, you know, we need to do something. So if we're not able to reach a settlement agreement, this is essentially just taking that language as status quo, but updating the list of schools. Because there were schools that needed to move up, and then there were schools that had come off of the list. And so it was kind of like a placeholder instead of status quo, just what we've been doing, really just switching in those lists of schools.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Joe?
I can see why we added J. Cole and Montessori, just probably in fear that they were probably going to be a BSI school again. But the only request is I want to be able to word this correctly, is early identification of possible schools. So you have the BSI schools I know there are a couple schools that may fall into BSI that won't know officially until grades come out, which is possibly the end of June. You're already done with hiring season. So I was hopeful that there could be some type of metric put in, because I can see you doing it for J. Cole and Montessori, but maybe striking the J. Cole and Montessori, just providing some type of metric that will show like a tentative BSI school or a tentative turnaround school, because I know of particularly one school that might fall into BSI that isn't included on here.
Okay. Anybody from the committee want to answer that?
For kind of clarification, we just talked about at that time when last time the turnaround committee met, the data that we were looking at that point, yeah, we thought, you know, that those two schools that were currently BSI schools might continue as BSI schools. We've gotten some better news about those schools progressing, which may not be in that same predicament.
Okay, Rob?
Yeah, just some clarification. So when it says at the end of the contract year, the committee intended that to be June 30th, correct?
I think so.
Okay, because
What other?
Anna just talked about 12 days being left, so I just want to.
Yeah.
We're talking about alarm clocks wrong.
Okay, well, the contract, just for clarity.
Yes, clarification would be the end of the contract.
Right, okay.
Not the end of the school. Correct.
And what vehicle are we going to use to document this? Are we going to do an MOU? Or, I mean, we've never kind of went in one clause in a contract.
Well, I think the meeting notes, I don't, what is your recommendation, Mr.?
MOU would be my recommendation.
And that we had that conversation, whether or not we should do an MOU, so I'll kind of defer at this point. Dr. Pizzon, yeah, I mean, go ahead if you want to. Oh, here you go.
Either way.
That's all right.
Well, here, I'll talk.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'll talk.
Okay.
You're on. Thank you. So I do have a question about some of the language related to the identified shortage area. So right now, that's what, 500 for that, or 200 or whatever?
Can you put up your
Put up the
proposal?
proposal again.
Oh, that was just notes. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, so we have to give money to teachers, and I'll get to the MOU question. We have to give money to teachers in areas where the state says there's a shortage. I believe we've negotiated that amount, I'm not sure what it is, a couple $100 maybe? 200, 1 to 200?
Yes.
It also says here that you're able to say, well, the state says we need math, but we don't need math, we're cool. We really need something else. And Kerr has confirmed for me that the legislation does give you that power. I just want to make sure that when we start adding things that aren't on the state list, they get the same supplement amount as those that are on the state list. I don't wanna see the district goes, we need tested subjects, $7,000. As a way to get kind of what was in there, sorry, Apollo, as a way to kind of get what was in their other proposal that we haven't agreed to. So I'm just concerned that when you start adding areas, we're gonna add them at the same rate of compensation that occur naturally for what we negotiated for the things that are on the state list.
Yeah, I think that's a whole different conversation that we can get into. I mean, I think we're talking about the turnaround schools, but the identified critical shortage areas, which is actually on my list to talk about tonight as well, is separate. But I think there's some legislation that we need to talk about that currently says that the district really can identify some critical areas and that shouldn't be part of one. But we can talk about that after we talk about this.
All right, so now the memorandum answer.
So we are currently in contract negotiations. And if we were to do an MOU, we would still have to ratify. Well, I'm not, there are two arguments here, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm on the outside, and I may be with you, which outside of, the Cincinnati Reds may not happen very often, right?
That's not true.
And so, I don't, and again, are we gonna start paying the people at these new schools August 1st when we haven't ratified a deal? Because what do we do if the deal doesn't ratify? Because I'm telling you right now, from the email I've received and the almost 1,000 emails that some people in this building have received, I have serious doubts about the ratification of the district's compensation proposal as it is. So,
Yeah, I mean, point taken in that, and that's why we, again, went back to the original language of what the turnaround committee's goals or objectives were to identify the criteria. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, there was a list of schools that was included for that particular year that the conversation and turnaround committee was always intended to go through that process and be, transition to transition and then transition out of transition to do that. And so, that conversation with the turnaround committee was, we're following what the contract language says. Identify the criteria, plug the schools in, and pay them accordingly. So we have a current contract language that I don't believe, I know Rob does, but I don't believe we need an MOU. That's the current contract language.
But, I'm concerned about, are we going to list the tier 4 schools somewhere? In the contract, in the appendix?
I think it should be an appendix.
Okay,
It should
but-
say in there, these are the schools that were
Right.
identified for this year, period. Subject to change.
Okay. Okay, and I'm just gonna say this out loud too, and I think almost everybody at this table bears some responsibility in this idea, right? The turnaround school committee hasn't effectively met for a long time. A long time. And the work they did this year was different, and the process has been different. But now on May 19th, we want to say, hey, can we make this sudden change? And calling it whatever we want to call it, rip the schools out, list the new schools in an appendix, start paying them on an unratified deal. On an unratified deal. Maybe the penalty, quite honestly, is until we ratify, these schools don't get taken off, and they start the year getting $4,000. And then when we ratify, those schools stop getting $4,000 and the new schools start. Because, it's inappropriate, it's stupid, it doesn't make sense, but they're listed. And I would, if we did an MOU, I would send it out for ratification. And Robert's right, we've never done one clause, said, hey, we're not enforcing anything else. I've been out visiting schools, I've been telling principals, the 30-minute lunch for teachers is not a done deal because it's not ratified. Regardless of the fact that you sent letters to parents saying that kids are getting a 30-minute lunch. So let's do the 30-minute lunch as a special deal too. How and where does this stop?
30-minute lunch is still within the contract. The contract says a minimum of 25 minutes.
Right, but again,
So that is a minimum.
but again, it's been a minimum of 25 minutes for 28 years, and I can count on one hand the amount of places where somebody's given more than 25, without the contract saying a minimum of 30. So we can say it's a minimum of 25, and they can do what they want to do, but there may be places that decide not to, because it hasn't been ratified. And so again, if we're kind of bending the clause here, are we willing to bend the clause there? And then if we bend here and bend there and bend here and bend there, what's the point of this? I mean, that's why I say I'm on the outside. I will say that completely honestly, I am kind of on the outside on this. But we haven't met constructively in a year and a half on this committee. And I think we bear some responsibility because we maybe weren't forceful enough to schedule meetings when you wouldn't, or didn't, right, with all the change that was down here. But at some point, there needs to be like, listen, you know, this is what we've got until we've got something different, because that's how contract language works. I'm honestly concerned about an employee who was on this list getting $4,000, deciding to say, well, gee, I didn't ratify the change, and call it up to Tallahassee, and we're both in trouble. I mean, you know, it's one of those things where, yeah, listing them's a problem, and we didn't list them subject to change, and we'll put them in the appendix and say subject to change, but it is what it is, and it's still my belief that honestly, promises were made by district level administrators about delivering exponential salary increases for certain schools based on their tier status and based on the subject that the teacher teaches. And you know, that's not how this works. We're here until we're not here. The moment we're not here, you can do whatever you want to do. And so that's where I'm at, and I'm telling you, I'm on the outside. I'm on the outside of that. And I'm going to hand it over to Kerr, and he's going to talk about something that, you know, may not agree with what I said, but that's fine, because I know he's going to do that.
I wasn't going.
Oh, okay. Well,
I would, am I truly next?
Yes.
Just looking at the statute and Ron, you said something that perked my ears about management's ability to offer supplements outside of the collective bargaining process. Could you speak about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to bring, I think I brought this up at some point in time in 101.2315, section 4, subset A, which is one statute. There's 101.2.07, and then there's another statute that is, I'm sorry, it's got a message, maybe loud. And I'm trying to do my best not to make that happen. The statute 1001.42, 21B, which again, there's a lot of language in the legislature that talks about the district providing incentives for what they've identified is either low-performing student achievement in schools or subject and grade level areas that may be outside of what the state identifies is that. And that it specifically says in there that no collective bargaining agreement should preclude a district from doing that. And again, I checked that language, I had some conversations with legal about that, and then we thought the best idea was to bring that up and get some feedback on that. Because does that mean that the law allows us to identify areas that we can provide incentives for? And if that's the case, maybe we pull that out of our option.
Kerr?
So I'm reading that line that you're mentioning. The board may identify other areas of critical shortage within the district for purposes of this sub paragraph and blah, 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 blah. I believe that speaks to the high demand teacher needs area supplement that we negotiated, which is on page 52 of the CBA, which receives a supplement of $200. If I'm reading this right, it appears that as Kevin, the example he gave, I don't even know what the high So right now for 24, 25, yeah, math is on there. Maybe math isn't a critical shortage here in Lee County, but PE is, and so the district would like to give PE teachers the high demand teacher needs area supplement, which we've negotiated to be $200. I didn't read that as the board would be able to make up another supplement.
What statute are you reading?
10-12-07.
He's reading, no, I'm sorry.
Current contract.
Yeah,
Oh, he's reading that.
Well, 10-12-22, as you had in your proposal, but in the current contract, we have a high demand teacher needs area. I believe that it speaks to that supplement and not just creation of another supplement with insert dollar amount here beside it.
And I'll go back. Sorry.
So Kerr, our focus, when Ron says this, is 10-12-2-3-1-5-4. And I actually would like FEA council's opinion relative to that statute.
Can you say it one more time?
10-12.231-5, parens 4, specifically 4A. And then there's the educational emergency language in 1001.4221B, as in boy. So those are the two statutes that the district is exploring regarding the idea of providing incentives, as Ron stated.
Okay.
I would like to issue a warning to the district. Okay? Your compensation proposal that had a 15% pay increase based on new starting teacher salary for tested subjects is not popular among your workers. There are 1,000 emails, almost 1,000 emails that have gone to people in this building once and 700 another time expressing that idea. Okay, I'm going to tell you something now. We may be doing it again before summer, and we may expand the list of people who are getting inundated with these emails. Okay? My advice to the district is, please don't play with statute and look for favorable judges and ruling to get something that you may want that your employees don't want. Because it is very dangerous to do that. That has never been done yet. If you can't, because I'm sure this is what we're referring to, we're not referring to P. If you can't negotiate the $7,500, and you decide, well, statute says this, and emergency says this, and I'm gonna declare an emergency, an educational emergency, and that allows me to, like the dean in favor, do whatever I wanna do. And then you implement something that is unpopular with your employees, I'm sure there will be consequences. I didn't want to say this for a while, but I would like to congratulate my brothers and sisters in Charlotte who are going to an almost $60,000 starting pay. I caution you against being creative with statute and ruling to get something that is unpopular with your employees. Our number one job is to negotiate the best deal I can that will be ratified. That's it. That's my job. I have to go out and sell the deal when I'm done negotiating. So does everybody on my side. I'm telling you, the people that I heard from do not like this idea. And so the idea that you're going to bend statute and do whatever and declare this and just impose it, there will be employee consequences. And we're already short.
And I do believe I heard Rob say to check with FEA attorneys too.
Yes.
About their interpretation.
Oh, yeah, we do that on an ongoing basis, yeah.
Yeah.
That's when Dr. Atkins used to call me Mr. Daly as opposed to Kevin. When I currently go to FEA.
One of the things that I've been doing over the last few weeks, I've been trying to
And I'm not getting into the statute thing, that's too deep for me. So that's not, so, but basically what I've been doing is talking to teachers. And this is more of, more of just sharing other perspectives for consideration. You know, and whatever direction, there always are, you know, like Mr. Daly, referred my reference of unintended consequences. So I'm aware of that, but I do want to have I just want to share some things, because I've been sitting back just listening and trying to hear from the teacher perspective. But this may be a little different, but I had some teachers I talked to, and these were some examples of, because what I kept hearing, I understand, you're trying to make sure whatever direction you go in, that you also try to, whatever decision ends up, wherever we end up getting to, trying to make sure it's not seen as divisive or separating or whatever. And so, but I just wanted to bring up, I didn't know some of this. So like, one of my teachers, several teachers actually talked about the law, like that a lot of this already exists, but we don't talk about it. So let me give you an example of a couple of things that are different. So the loan forgiveness piece. So like, I understand it, because I never did get the loan forgiveness, because when I was teaching, I was working at Cypress Lake. That basically, it's always been Title I schools, because that's sort of the way that it's always been given out there. You work at a Title I school in order to get the forgiveness. But the part I knew about that part. The part I wasn't aware of is that apparently, and I won't take this as fact because I don't know for a fact, but my understanding is that if you're a math and science, you got a larger amount for loan forgiveness as opposed to other areas. And I say that just to say that there are some of the differences are already, they are there. So like, my understanding is that $17,500 over 5 years that you can get forgiven if you're in math and science, as opposed to, let's say you're reading $4,000 over 5 years. Another example that I'm more familiar with is this, and we already have this. There are some schools, when we think about state money, so I look at the federal level, I look at the state level. So with state money, with the A+ money, which is, there are some schools that they can count on every year, pretty much, they're gonna get the A+ money. But a lot of the schools, when we start talking about the differences, they can't count on it. The only way you count on it is that, like 1 year, being a heavy ESOL populated school, as well as Title I and low socioeconomic and all of that, when we slipped to a D 1 year, so we got the chance to go back to a C, and we scratch and claw to maintain that. So that 1 year we're able to get A+ money. But you almost have to have a penalty in order, at certain, you know, there are certain schools that they have to have a penalty year. And then, when we look at in the high school ranks, schools that have a large IB population, large ACE population, and those teachers who teach seniors in those schools, they have the opportunity to make quite a bit of extra money. And as some of the teachers I've talked to at different schools say that, well, I'm just happy to get them to get the diploma, but I don't get anything really much extra for that. And so, and the point I just wanted to make is that, honestly, there's an undercurrent that's maybe quiet, but, and I think that's something I just want to just share. As we look at this, it's not just as clear cut, and actually it's already existing. And some of those concerns, because as I said before, I've been listening and trying to, you know, look at it in an objective manner as possible. But even within those schools, some people have an advantage, and so those things do exist. We just kind of just don't necessarily upfront say it. But it happens on every campus. It happens in the district. It happens all around. So those concerns are there. And so how we go about approaching it, and in the least disruptive way as possible, I think that is something we need to look at, and as we go forward, and understanding that when we look at interest-based the interest and all of those elements. I just don't want that other side not to be shared. And that's what I wanted to say.
All right.
And I appreciate that, and I can tell you in my 21 years at Royal Palm, we had A+ money one time. Honestly, we didn't even know we got it. Like, they were like, you got this. We're like, huh? And so I will give you my opinion of A+ money personally, which is, it's awful, and it's divisive, and the employees of some schools absolutely screw their colleagues, screw the support staff, and do everything they can to ensure that somebody that taught there to make the grade, that is not there the next year, do not get the money. So that is divisive, but that is not us doing it. That is the state doing it, and they're doing it for that reason. The federal loan forgiveness, I think we will see a return back to where we were, which is 98% of them get rejected. But again, that is a federal decision. This is us at this table, 15 feet away from the employees, making a decision to engage in that behavior. And that's my problem. Is that the worst thing I had to do was sit here and negotiate a $6,000 pay raise for new people and leave the experienced people out. The only reason that happened was because the state mandated it. That is it. Those things you talk about are indeed unfair. However, they have been thrust upon us. We were not complicit in that idea. This is complicity by us in that idea. And so, again, a tested subject, maybe a little more, but $7,500, that's some money. We had there was a crisis at a school today, and a Tier 6 employee did not stay. Maybe when the Tier 6 employee gets 70 grand, the Tier 3 employee looks at him and go, you got this, because you're making 70 grand under your proposal. Maybe they leave, you got this. Those things, and I agree, the A+ money is awful, but it's inflicted upon us. We take more phone calls in my office about that, the absolute inequity about how that's done, the fact that I tell my reps, please do not engage in those conversations. Do not make it look like you had a hand in designing the plan, because it is completely outside of the process. The same thing with loan forgiveness. It is inflicted upon us. I mean, I couldn't get my loans forgiven because I worked at Royal Palm, not a Title I. I mean, so again, this is us being complicit in this idea here locally, not it being inflicted upon us by either the state or the federal government. And that's what I think, for me, the difference is that I don't want to be complicit. Just like I don't want to be complicit in raising starting teacher pay without giving it to everybody who works for the district. And I don't know. We see the school board meetings time and time again, and one parent gets up and says something, and 4 district personnel go over and talk to them. You have gotten over 900 emails saying your idea is bad, and we don't want it, but that doesn't seem to be enough. So again, I caution against implementing the elected superintendent's first contract, implementing something with creative use of statute that they couldn't bargain at the bargaining table. And that's all I'm saying. And again, for as long as we are here, we are here. So that's what I have to say on that.
All right.
So, that being said, I'd like to kind of turn around back to the turnaround.
That's all right.
Because
Just
that's
so-
where the conversation started, and we didn't get to have that conversation. I think there is a recommendation from the turnaround committee that we approach that way so that our principals and the employees understand moving forward that they can advertise whatever way that is. So I don't know if we need to put that, how you want to approach that. But again, I go back to what the intent of the language says. I mean, you haven't necessarily followed the language that's in the contract since it's been in there, in inception, because it still refers to only D and F schools that should be identified as turnaround schools. And I don't got away from that. I don't necessarily have issue. I have issue with, we're going to start paying people without a ratified deal. That's my issue.
But you have current,
you have current contract language. So what would happen starting July 1 is if we don't have an agreement, the current contract moves forward.
Right.
So the idea is what does the current contract language say? What was its intent, and how do we move forward within current contract language so that we can provide the teachers an opportunity or the principals and the buildings and everybody an opportunity to understand that they qualify or they don't qualify.
I mean, and I would also say that the way we did it this year is a direct kind of change from 10 years worth of past practice, with just the district going, hey, we reread the language and we think it means something different. I mean, past practice was, all of this happened over here and the whole recommendation came.
Well, I would respectfully say that was the decision made by the turnaround committee, which is a participatory decision-making committee that agreed that the way you've been doing it probably was not the way it was intended.
Okay. I think we're gonna need to caucus on this.
Okay, so you're calling for a caucus.
I am.
All right, time?
15.
15. All right, if they're going to go for caucus, I am asking everybody out there to please stay seated until everybody gets to their caucus room, and then you're free to roam around anywhere. Maybe just setting something up for our own RFP for the report in a second.
Setting me up, is that what I heard?
No, I still, even though it's not on paper, it's still.
Not setting you up.
That's what I heard.
All right, Kurt.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't ready. All right, I made some notes because I could not remember everything that we said. But our caucus really revolved around one thing, union values. And that we believe in lifting up all educators, not pitting them against each other. We discussed that the turnaround school supplement already exists as a very targeted recruitment and retention tool. There's no justification, we believe, for expanding inequitable pay practices beyond that. And also making payment before ratification makes us quite uncomfortable, especially since this isn't a practice that we've utilized in the past. We talked about what these schools need. Struggling schools need sustainable staffing, smaller class sizes, more paras, or instructional support professionals, I should say, wraparound services, and time for meaningful collaboration. What we said was, we don't need a short-term Band-Aid that fractures unity. And to be very, very frank, it's very hard for us to take seriously a plan that claims to support our most vulnerable schools when the director of turnaround schools for the district doesn't even live in the state of Florida. Real change requires real presence, and real money is in everyone's hands. And I'm speaking to the proposal as a whole and not just turnaround. We discussed the email campaign and some media reports, because the district told the media that there's just a misunderstanding. So we're really wondering, what is the misunderstanding? This plan divides educators, it devalues collaboration, and it undermines our shared mission of public ed. And just in closing for our caucus report, we can't build a stronger system by eroding the foundational values that all educators deserve fair and equitable compensation. We do the most for the most. Like I said, this was a conversation around union values, and we simply ask and expect the district to stand with us on that front.
Great, thank you. Ryan, your caucus report?
We had conversations specifically about what we discussed tonight in relation to the turnaround committee and why we felt like again, to reiterate that the language that is in place would allow us to identify those 10 schools and supply the supplement in the amount of $4,000 to those employees without any MOU or anything along those lines. That contract language allows us to do that currently, and moving forward, starting July 1, that would be, that wasn't our proposal, that was the turnaround committee's suggestion to this body today to accept that and just come to an agreement. Obviously we're not going to ratify anything, but our intent is to provide some feedback to those schools that they can move forward with advertising those positions and giving them the ability to recruit and retain the teachers that they have based on that supplement. We also had a conversation about pay grades and what that might look like, and later we could have an option that is a little bit different than what we presented originally around pay grades. So that was our area of the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Doesn't the language also currently sunset in that it says for FY25?
We believe that the schools actually sunset, so that, when you talk about turnaround? Yeah, we think the schools that were identified in that is what sunsets. So that the criteria used to identify them should be established on a regular basis.
and then we would probably follow our incredibly lengthy past practice of not paying until ratified. Again, my problem is, in this one instance, in my 7 years in this position, going on 8, we're paying people without ratifying. And that's the problem. We're paying people without ratifying.
There are other provisions within the contract that we would continue to pay. All of the supplements and all of the language that provides incentives, like ACE and those kinds of things would be continued to pay. There wouldn't be anything different in relation to the way you look at that language moving forward. You're not going to not pay, one of the ACE supplements because we haven't ratified. That would be the assumption that we would continue to do that moving forward.
But we're not changing that language around ACE. We have a 3-year contract, we have a 3-year contract.
Language and turnaround either.
I think we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on that. By the way, I want to officially, nobody has, and I was neglectful in the beginning, to welcome Jill back with Apollo. It's good to see her here.
Great to have you back.
I have a question about like ACE money, because we're talking about money, like if your students pass, you get so much money per pass, same thing with AP. But that money comes from a separate program, that's not through district funded money, right? That's through ACE or College Board or those programs that are
I guess
paying.
that's a bad example then
Yeah.
to use because it might be different. My point is there are other provisions in the contract and different incentives that we would continue to pay even though the contract wasn't ratified.
Okay, Anna.
I have a couple questions about the current contract language. It says in here that a supplement of $4,000 is available for all instructional staff assigned to Florida Department of Education identified turnaround schools, including G. Weaver Hicks and Manatee Elementary. I believe those are no longer BSI schools. So are they receiving an extra supplement?
I don't believe they are. I believe coming into this year, they weren't because they were no longer BSI schools.
And then
I don't have Amy here to verify that.
there are 4 current BSI schools. I know Edgewood is listed as a turnaround school. Jay Collin, I believe Lemuel Teal, and what's the name of the school? I cannot say that word. I call it a man school. It's my apologies. I can try. So I'm curious on why, if those 4 schools, I know Edgewood is would still receive money under risk level 4, but in the proposal, it mentions in here Jay Collin and the school, but not Lemuel Teal. And that was not something we talked about in the committee, so why is there a change of that in this proposal and Lemuel Teal not added in there?
I don't recall that. Yeah, I'm not sure I know what you're referring to.
The language on the proposal, it says that Jay Collin and that school would be considered if required by the Florida Department of Education. So I'm just curious, Edgewood is a current BSI school, but that would be included with risk level 4. But is Lemuel Teal a current BSI school that is not captured there?
Again, I think that when we had this conversation, based on the data that we had at that point, that those 2 schools were probably going to remain as BSI. That we were pretty confident based on the data that Lemuel Teal and Edgewood were definitely not going to be. So that's why I think we included the language that says if required by the Department of Education, meaning if they're still BSI.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Jill?
So from what I was able to watch at home and try to participate as best I could, I know that it looks like with turnaround and some of these supplements, we're moving to a tier approach where we're gonna group schools in tiers, right? And so Eastleigh County High School and Iron Coast are gonna be considered transition schools. And I'm wondering, because in the meetings I did attend, it looked like there were some adjustments to the tiers based on poverty, because this is up on the screen, transition, which would mean that their supplement would be reduced, right?
Yeah, so let me provide some clarification to that, because that was brought up at turnaround too. So typically, what we've done in the past is if you were turnaround, and you were no longer considered turnaround, then you would move to transition. So we agreed as a turnaround committee that those two schools, Island Coast and East Lee, were turnaround, that they would move to transition, therefore they'd be eligible for the 2000 supplement. Based on, the typical conversations in the past, when you don't meet the criteria that the committee established, then they would become transition, and that's what the language currently said. So we agreed as a turnaround committee that those two schools should then be included. Moving forward, if we say the language is what it is and it says what it says, that those two schools should be identified as transition.
Okay, so I guess what's maybe I'm not understanding is schools are being tiered, and there's a tier where all those schools are gonna receive additional monies that would have at one point been considered turnaround?
So the risk level 4 is what we consider the tier that the identified criteria by the turnaround committee, and what we shared, the schools that met that criteria, and everybody agreed that those 10 schools, which we consider risk level 4. In the district's option that was presented, we've also gone further than that and identified risk level 3, risk level 2, risk level 1, based on some of that identical criteria that we had to figure out where we can classify schools, because in our option, in the district's option, we presented an option that would pay teachers an additional supplement in tested areas in risk level 3 schools. We also talked about what the option says is for a self-contained ESE teacher, there would be an additional supplement in risk level 4, risk level 3, but we then also included risk level 2 schools to include the ESE supplement. But so those risk level 3, 2, and 1 were identified to help us with the district's options that we presented here.
And those risks were based on school grade, like student performance?
Nope, not at all. They were based on 2 separate criteria. The criteria that was established was the direct certification rates, which measures the poverty level in those schools, and the percentile rank of onboarded students in those grade levels. So in elementary schools, it would be over the last 3 years, the ELA proficiency rates of kindergarten students. For middle schools, it would be the ELA proficiency rates for onboarded 6th grade students. And then for high school, over 3 years, onboarded 9th graders, ELA proficiency scores in a ranked percentile. So what that means is, and I'll use kind of Mirror Lakes as an example, if you will. They have their onboarded kindergarten students, the ELA proficiency rank is fairly low, but in relation to the rest of the schools in the district, they're ranked like 20th amongst the elementary schools. And so that's the difference between a percentile rank and just looking at the onboarded ELA proficient students.
Okay, because it's been a few years since I worked at East Lee County High School. I was there for 14 years, and when I was there, I remember our incoming 9th grade population being about 75 to 80% level 1s, and I'm pretty sure Island Coast could probably boast pretty similar incoming level 1 and 2 students, which means that the teachers at those schools now have a heavier lift to get them staying out of like DF range. And when we started turnaround, because that's the committee that I started, and it's been my passion since it began, the goal was to keep schools out of turnaround, which is now a BSI, and it was really to focus on our DRF schools. And those are 2 schools that, and I worked at East Lee for 14 years, and I love that school, but East sits on a very slippery slope, and they can easily go from a C 1 year to teetering right above an F. And I think that, and I know I wasn't in all the turnaround meetings, I couldn't necessarily participate in everything, but it is concerning that we want to pay people like an extra $7,500 if you teach US history, which is tested area, but we're not gonna use those test scores and those grades to determine what schools have the most need for this money. And that's concerning for me, and I wasn't able to bring that up, and, but I wanted to say that I'm very concerned that these are also schools that have high turnover rate. That reduction in support is gonna drastically impact those schools' ability to hire.
All those conversations took place in the turnaround committee. We voted thumbs up for everybody in that committee to identify the criteria moving forward to identify those schools. I understand your feeling, and that was part of the discussion, but we were looking at specifically identifying criteria that can be used on a sustainable basis. That was done by committee.
Okay.
Bringing us back to what we're talking about, which is the district's option regarding turnaround. If we can't do something prospectively, can we, or actually currently, can we modify our option? I will modify our option to not include the language about doing it right now.
So can we agree that those will be the schools, once the contract's ratified, for turnaround and transition, like we would have done in the past?
Okay, and this is the committee's recommendation.
Correct, the committee's recommendation without, the committee recommends that if a settlement is not reached language.
Right. Kevin, you need the mic.
Please. And this is another kind of thing. This is a temporary solution. Because the district's proposal, the proposal that the district had is $5,000 for ESE self-contained. You can say no, it's all right, but.
No, it's different, this is a different subject.
But this also includes the $7,500 for tested subject.
No, this is a
Not
different.
the
For this turnaround committee recommendation?
So turnaround is only $4,000.
The turnaround, as it stands, is only $4,000 for those 10 schools that the turnaround committee identified as meeting the criteria, according to current contract language. And what we said was, in the past, when those schools didn't qualify any longer, that we would move them to transition. And that's why you see East Lee and Island Coast now, again, that is not part of the proposal. The proposal, the option that the district put up there, has nothing to do with that. It's completely different than this. This is what the turnaround committee decided was basically based on current contract language. If we needed to move forward with the turnaround supplement, this is how we would do it.
So.
It's not the district's option.
And I'm concerned about an unintentional second bite at the apple around the money that was going to tier 3, the tested subjects. So those things are going to be handled without any reference to the turnaround schools. And you're not going to come back later and go, we got 4, but we really wanted 5. So now tier 4, which is turnaround, is going to be 5.
I don't think we have the ability to do that at this point. If we ratify something different at that point, say in November, we ratify an option that would include $5,000, then we would have to figure out how to implement that at that point. I don't feel like we have the ability to do that right now because we're not accepting any options. This is based on current contract.
So, so we're probably going to caucus. Just before I go in the caucus, I need to understand. So essentially what the modification is to the option is we're changing the names of the schools and nobody at the new schools get paid until we ratify.
No. We're not presenting an option here. This is not an option. This was a recommendation to this committee, to these bargaining teams, based on the recommendations from the turnaround committee. More or less, we thought it was appropriate, and I asked this question. You typically bring that to the bargaining team, and the answer was yes. So we brought the recommendation from the turnaround committee, and again, included the caveat is, that's what the current contract language says. We wanted this group's kind of blessing to say that we've all agreed that it's current contract language, and this is what the recommendation is by the committee. Shall we move forward with that? It's not an option that we're presenting from the district standpoint. This is the recommendation of the turnaround committee of the current contract language.
So what if we decide not to endorse that recommendation?
Then we go status quo. Then I think we have current contract language that says whatever's in those schools, they continue to get, but that's not the recommendation of the turnaround committee.
So
It would be opposing the contract committee that you said, that we set up.
Right, I get it. But this is the first time we've ever done it like this. I mean, this is the first time this discussion has happened outside of the turnaround committee with such detail. I mean, at what point does, according to Robert's Rules of Order, at what point does an amendment and a different recommendation become okay? I guess theoretically.
So if, the names to the schools are not updated to the current recommendation for schools, and the contract stays the way that it is, essentially status quo, that puts us in a position where schools that are no longer on the list would be receiving money, and they would start off the year with receiving money, and then eventually that money is gonna go away, and, all of the schools on this list, all of them, the ones that are currently in the contract and the ones that are on the new list, all of us are still losing money because of the 30 minutes. So all of this is it's still, and I know you guys don't see it that way, it's still a pay cut. It's still, whether it is what it is, it's for me personally, it's $8,000. Every other person in my school is at least $8,000. So this is just even an opportunity to keep half of it. But I would really hate to put teachers in a position that are already losing money to get some money and not be able to know what their checks are gonna be like on a regular basis moving forward and have money be taken from them again. That would not be in anyone's best interest.
All right, we mentioned a caucus. Do we need a caucus again? Kevin?
I'm not sure. I mean, again, my beef is paying without ratification. And the precedent that sets that we're gonna pay without ratification. Now, we could do an MOU and get that out separately. There's no way we would have that done before August. We could do the MOU that says what we want to say and set another precedent, which is we'll do an MOU while we're in open bargaining, which again, I don't think we've ever done, and I think is probably against the best legal advice of my legal team and may possibly be against the best legal advice of your team. You know, not a lawyer, but you know, that's why we're in bargaining. So my issue, as always, and has always been, if these are the schools that we identify through the process, they are the schools. It is what it is. I was concerned about another bite at the apple. And after we do this, we come back in August and we go, oh, well, we did that, and people are getting $4,000, but now we want to talk about the $75,000. And then my other beef is payment without ratification. The members, the employees get a vote on this. And again, if the contract doesn't ratify, if we do this now and pay without ratification, and something happens, and the deal we present is not ratified, are we going to continue to pay the teachers in these schools? We paid them without ratification, the deal didn't ratify, are we going to continue to pay them? And quite honestly, I'm going to say this out loud as I've said in several places. In my 8 years in this seat as president and 2 or 3 years prior to that, we have never been theoretically as far apart on compensation and the method by which we do it as we are today. We are theoretically as far apart as we have ever been.
All right, so back to the recommendation. Do we want to accept it or not accept it?
I think we need to talk about it because,
Who needs to talk?
well, if we put our thumb down, right?
Right?
Let's talk this through. If we put our thumb down, I have to tell you what it takes to get me to here.
Correct.
What it takes to get me to here is possibly the idea we don't pay without ratification, which is essentially kind of a rogue option that's been thrown out there in the ether here. So I don't know, and that's why I say I'm on the outside with this. There may be members of my team who are not happy with me, but I really, I'm having regular treatments to my eye, and I'm taking sick time when I do it as opposed to flexing my schedule, because if an employee that wasn't me had to do it, they would have to take sick time. So this idea of kind of abiding by the rules, and never have we paid without ratification as far as I know, or did we do a hold harmless one time? I don't know, is problematic to me in that regard. Because it's a big deal to do something and not ratify. It's a big deal.
Well, another thing would be to take this recommendation off the table until we meet again from the committee. Ron?
We can take the recommendation from the turnaround committee, which again is a contractual committee, it's supposed to make a recommendation on which schools we've identified as turnaround schools. If we do that, then it would remain status quo, and we would, I think, by contract, have to pay those schools that have been identified in this current contract, and to continue to pay them until we make another decision upon ratification. Would we not pay anybody then, any turnaround supplement or transition supplement, because we haven't ratified a contract? I know that you, in the past, now I know that you've done status quo, so you've not changed any of that, so it just continued to roll over. So, but you have ratified the contract past August in the past, correct? So how did you go about paying those schools that were identified as turnaround schools at that point, or did you not pay it? Well, that's what you did say that, but and you weren't ratified and you paid them, and because the recommendation from the turnaround committee was to keep those schools status quo. The recommendation from the turnaround committee is different this year because we haven't recommended the status quo. We recommended there are 10 schools that have been identified.
To answer the question, I think for the last 3 years, it's been status quo because we couldn't get an agreement. Or funding or whatever it was, so we didn't have to cross that bridge. And just for story, we've been talking about this since February. I mean, members of our team mentioned the urgency in February so that you all could advertise in April for the job fair for the schools that may receive extra funding. I know it's May 19th, but we've been talking about this for quite a while.
Question. So if the turnaround committee in February would have made that recommendation in February before bargaining started, then we would have paid those schools based on the current contract.
Yeah, if it was ratified, yeah.
If it was ratified. Yeah. If it wasn't ratified, even though the recommendation was made in February, how would you handle that?
I think we would have asked to not implement pending ratification. Just as in the past, we've given the district, authority is not the right word, but we said, please go ahead and implement this, and we will ratify, right afterwards. We know it's going to ratify, go ahead. I think in this case, we give the opposite advice. Hold off and don't ratify. The worst thing we could ever do would be put money in people's hands and then take it right back.
Well, I get that, and I think I know partially what we're gonna say is, there is no reason the district would, if we identify based on turnaround current contract language, unless we ratify something different at that point, those schools will get that $4,000 and $2,000 for transition until a new contract is ratified. And at that point, if it's the same amount, then they continue to get that. If it's, we agree to $5,000, then we retroactively give them the $5,000.
I mean, I have emailed back since October asking about when the turnaround committee was going to meet. My principal's been asking about it. And it's just unfortunate that we're in this situation, because, there's been several things that have been mentioned, that everyone, we've had turnover, everyone's changed positions, and I know that has happened. It's upsetting. It's upsetting that we're in this situation, and yeah, the last few years, all we've done is status quo, status quo, status quo, for at least 3 years. I'm not okay with status quo, the way that it is. I don't think that those schools that are listed there, there's schools that need to be there, and there's schools, that would change, and schools that would come off the list. It's just upsetting that we're in this situation right now.
I want to pass it to Rob, please. Thank you, Anna.
So we're sitting here talking about this being like the end. Why does it have to be the end? Can't we set some new dates? Can we get it on the calendar? We used to bargain during the summer, pay the teachers their hourly rate. I mean, why are we giving up that on August 12th, this couldn't be in place? I know your ratification would be difficult perhaps, but why are we sitting here on May 19th? Like this is the last time we're ever gonna meet.
Well, that's been discussed, and we were gonna look at calendars tonight. I want to pass it back to Anna, please.
Well, to counter that claim, why did we come in here week after week after week and we canceled? Week after week, we said we had nothing to talk about. We'd come in here, we'd be here, it'd be 4:24. Oh, nothing to talk about, let's go home. Oh, nothing to talk about, let's go home. We added 3 extra days to the calendar to try and get this done, and we didn't even take advantage of that time. And now you want to have an interest of us taking our time in the summer, the times we actually have with our families, to come in here and continue this conversation over and over again? When we could have done that all of the time since February? I think that's absurd.
I have another, and I went to like one turnaround committee meeting. Was there a recommendation for special instructional that's different than it currently is?
Similar conversation.
Yeah, we did look at all of the employees, but, many of our special instructional that are itinerants, we would have to figure out that way to compensate them accordingly, again, prorated for the times that they would be.
But that's not part of the recommendation.
There is no recommendation for that.
There was no current recommendation for that. Again,
The only recommendation is to update the list. That's all that.
that's the only recommendation at this point, is to update the.
And I'm gonna echo what Anna said about bargaining over the summer. I will tell you, I would like for every school district employee to put it down on June 4th and not pick it up again until August 1st. Or whenever the first day back is, August 3rd. Bargaining over the summer is not, I want people in the audience. I want people on YouTube. I want Hannah to spend time with her daughter. I want people to take breaks and go places. I do. Bargaining over the summer is not, it does not give the employees of this district the optimum opportunity to engage in the process.
All right, well, it
I'm
is,
hearing you say, no, we're not bargaining over the summer.
We do not bargain over the summer. I mean, again, we started the day after the Super Bowl. We met every other Monday.
We don't bargain over the summer.
We don't-
bargained for years over the summer.
Not with me, and I don't ever recall bargaining over the summer commission. Right, so in July 1st, 2027,
You want an agreement for your team, you would bargain over the summer.
I want my team to be able to watch the process.
Oh, that's more important.
I think I have an elephant. This is not interest-based any longer.
that's,
I want my team to watch the
I would
process.
agree with Ann at this point. I don't know that we're making any progress with
we're not making progress. And it is 6:37, so we need to schedule a next date.
So
I know we have
I
spell
think
August
Stout
4th,
is on the calendar on August 4th.
I believe so.
August 11th is the first day of school, which I'm sure is not a good day for every administrator on this table and everybody in the audience, and every teacher on my side. August 11th, August 18th is probably a stretch. And that would be Stout. You know, so the 20, whatever. Unless we want to entertain a non-Monday day.
The 18th.
I mean, I would be happy, this far in advance, I'd be happy to entertain a non-Monday.
So what if we look at the week of the 18th?
Is that the third week?
Yeah.
So we have a meeting on Wednesday,
Oh, right.
which is, we have our rep meetings on Wednesday.
Mhm.
So it's not the 20th.
So yeah, I mean, any other day that week is, not Friday, because the 19th is fine with me.
What do you think about the 19th?
I mean, there's no resistance to a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday.
What about an overnight?
Whatever, overnight, you wanna.
You're the first person
bring
entertaining
your
it.
conferences in, we can do.
So we can do the 19th, and then we'll do that next Monday, because that would be our regular cycle Monday, right?
Right.
And then we'll go every other Monday from there. At least for now.
It works for most everybody,
So
19th of August.
we're not gonna get back together until August. So I just wanna be clear when we leave tonight, because we need some clear direction. That when it comes to turnaround, and those schools that have been identified, we are not accepting the recommendation of the 10 schools to receive the turnaround subsidy.
Can you say that?
Can you repeat that, please?
When we leave here tonight, so we're not getting back until August. So July 1 starts a new school year, a new fiscal year. Moving into August, then there will be paychecks. And we need to determine whether or not the recommendation of the 10 schools is accepted. If not, we're not paying anybody any turnaround subsidies.
That's what you're asking for, is to not pay until you have a deal.
I think that's it, because the schools that are currently on the list no longer meet the criteria.
Yeah.
And so they would fall off. Well, unless, do some of them do meet the criteria?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess the ones that meet the criteria,
So the ones that are currently identified in the contract that meet the criteria, those risk level 4 criteria, would be the ones who receive the turnaround subsidy.
that's awful sloppy, but it may be what it is.
I think you continue to pay the status quo. Because you're changing the contract, just like you didn't want to do, without ratifying it. By taking school off of it.
So this is the question I have, because not an attorney, but following the logic, because an attorney is just about logical thinking and applying logic to things, right? So following the logic, the first paycheck is August 31st, correct? No? Yeah.
First paycheck, August 31st.
For the new year, yeah.
For the new year, it should be August 31st. Yeah, the 15th is the one from the previous summer, from this year. So there is a deadline about when things need to go to payroll.
Wouldn't that be August 1st? So you would need to make that recommendation by August 1st.
Okay.
Because those 2 weeks then would be reflected on August 31st.
It's just interesting that all the pressure to make the change appears to be over here. I mean, again, I'm gonna get phone calls either way. I am. I'm gonna get phone calls either way. And so the thing I have to rely on is what I believe makes sense, is in the contract, and is logical. Because I had a great conversation with an employee about supplements. And even though I was as logical as I could be and explained what had happened for 8,000 years since the disciples first taught Jesus, it wasn't enough. And so I'm going to get it either way, and you're going to get it either way. So the decision is the decision of the group, not the fact that TALC won't let something happen.
I think from the management perspective, as far as I respect the decision, I vote to accept the recommendation by the turnaround committee that those 10 schools identified would receive the $4,000 supplement.
Anna, did you want to say something about the turnaround committee's
Yeah.
recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, my question is if the recommendation is not accepted and we have the current status quo language, it does say in here that it's for FY '25. So does that mean if we don't accept this recommendation, all of these schools are out because FY '25 is over? Because we're not changing the date of it. Because before, when we would change the date, we would vote for status quo, and that was how the dates were changed. So if we're not accepting this recommendation for these 10 schools, then all the schools are out. Is that how I'm reading that? Because the date isn't being changed.
Yeah, because it was for 24, 25, it says that.
And I think that's something Ron mentioned that if we didn't implement the change, then nobody would get any extra funding because it wasn't ratified. So,
Right,
Yeah.
we can do retroactivity. I mean, I'm just gonna say I'll add retroactivity as a kind of a compelling interest of us. I mean, that is the cleanest, to let it essentially fall to the floor until we, get involved in this again. And, again, hopefully over the summer, and we come back and, we were able to move on this, and then able to move through compensation, and we're done by September 15th. So people have missed like 2 checks. And it doesn't really make a difference. I mean, the people on tier 4 know they're on tier 4. That is no longer a secret. So they are getting the $4,000. It's just, is it August 31st or is it September 15th? Because we've determined who's on the list.
So we can tell those tier 4 schools that they can advertise that there will be additional compensation. Or, I'm sorry, risk level 4.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be loud, but decided against it.
I mean, so I'm just gonna ask a question out loud. Have you been advertising schools with dollar signs next to their names?
I think that's been common practice, but it doesn't necessarily.
Okay, but where, but what,
Additional supplements that are currently in the contract, like yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I don't think it's a lot of prison fair though that they did.
No, they have.
Okay.
But there's always been supplements in addition to the salary that are on the table, like the department chair and the whatever. There's additional dollars that doesn't necessarily have to pertain to term.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we can,
Because again, I'm not debating the schools are the schools.
the schools are the schools. The tier 4 schools have been identified. They're gonna get the $4,000. It's a matter of when. And when people look to be mad and blame, I will take my share of the heat. From my people, you will take your share of the heat from your people. And maybe this is a lesson to all of us, to not let 2.5 years go by without meaningful meetings of this committee. And again, I fully say, I'm to fault there too, because if the turmoil down here led to lack of scheduling, I could have very well picked up the phone, I could have scheduled meetings, I could have done stuff. So this is a lesson for everybody in the idea that maybe we shouldn't let it lapse. And this is just how we're gonna have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a plan for every one of our contract committees moving forward with date schedules, the intervals, all of those things are moving forward scheduled.
Good. Okay.
So I think
They're not
We'll let Tina go
advertised with
first.
dollar signs, they're not, none of them are.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right, at the risk of sounding very rude and probably way too bold, I'm going to say out loud, my feeling is that we have spoken a lot about what management has put forward as recommendations and as options, and we have not come to necessarily any conclusion, obviously, but with the ask of us bargaining over the summer, instead of us bargaining over summer, I am asking that in particular, management goes back and looks at the recommendation or the option that we put on the table as far as how the money is allocated. So that way we have more than just one side of the story being discussed. Because I've yet to hear since we put an option out there that's not even been discussed at all. I didn't remember very many questions or anything about that. So I would like that to be discussed and, rolled around in the brains, whatever you want to do over the summertime, so when we come back, we can look at that option again.
That would be great. We would like to see an option, other than, we talked about, one of the options was a $60 million option that we had conversation about paring down and looking at, what we would do. We have a little piece of that was a kind of an option that's presented to the management side of, presenting the at-risk and risk level 4 and those kinds of things. But I don't know that we've actually got to the specific option that TALC has presented for us to consider as opposed to that, other than that option that was presented, that what we would do with risk level 4, 3, and 2 schools.
I'm sorry that my computer ran out of battery, but Amy, could you check the notes and see, didn't we come up with something? Like, yeah.
Right there. At the top. The first one, option 1.
Lots of options.
Option 1,
Option
2.
No, I think
I was
option,
thinking 5 or 6 maybe.
it was either 5 or 6. Option 6.
Okay.
$65 million option.
Yeah.
I know, but are there parts of that we can have considered over the summer to be able to come back and discuss those kind of things?
Option 8.
Option 8?
Option 8, option 9, like we've come back with things.
We just TA'd option A.
Yeah, option 8 is done.
I know.
I feel like we keep going around the same thing over and over again, and maybe we need to take a break from that, go discuss something else, and then come back to this possibility.
Thank you.
Like, you can pass option 9, and go with the schools and do that. Right? That's option 9, pass it out.
Actually, we did have kind of a request to test the recommendation from the turnaround schools. But I think I'm gonna see a lot of thumbs down, and we're running out of time this evening unless you want to stay past 7.
I just want to clarify something for Ron, because I don't know if we ever got an answer.
Do I need to answer the question, because I can just stay here and take the.
No, stay here.
Might as well stay there anyway, because you're gonna get it next.
So,
I should.
Ron asked how we could advertise jobs at those schools. And I don't think, but I would recommend that we put an asterisk that says pending contract ratification. If we have to advertise them and wanted to advertise them with the additional money, that's all I wanted to say.
because I don't think you ever got an answer.
All right, thanks, Rob. Kevin, were you up next?
Not really.
Okay. All right.
Other than I'm glad the fact that we don't have a caucus, because we would need another room.
Louis has his hand up.
Oh, Louis has his hand up. We would have needed another room, so.
Before I say something, that's pretty much it.
Pretty much.
Oh, yeah, that's right, you're going to,
Okay, so, little bit disappointed we didn't get as much as I would have liked to accomplish. However, this is my last one. So I want to thank Dr. Casone and Jill for bringing me on 4 years ago. They were my gateway into the teacher union. No pun intended, really. But it really has been an honor to represent our fellow teachers and to sit at this table with all of you over the past 4 years. So other than that, thank you very much and so long.
if you know any tuba players that want to go to Idaho, you'll talk to me.
And thank you, Louis. Thank you for your time and your knowledge. All right. August 19th.
You know.
Enjoy your summer.
Thank you.
All right.